Hello and welcome to episode 10 of Cold Case Christmas. Fairly rattling through these cold cases now. We'll soon be halfway through. Remember, there will be a different cold case every single day, all the way up to and including December 24th. In this video, we're going to be looking at the bizarre case of Ricky McCormick. In June of 1999, 41-year-old Ricky McCormick was found dead in a cornfield in West Alton in Missouri. When investigators checked over his body, they found two cryptic notes that no one has been able to decipher. Many have tried, but it continues to be just lines of random letters with no apparent meaning. Specifically, it was June 30th, 1999 that a woman was driving alongside a field road near Highway 367 near West Alton. She just happened to glance out of the window. She thought it could be a body lying there. So she pulled up alongside the cornfield and she took a look. And yeah, it was a decomposed body of a man. He was wearing dirty blue jeans and a stained white t-shirt. And it was in such an advanced state of decomposition that the flesh on his hands had rotted to the extent its fingertips had fallen off. When investigators browsed the scene, they found them in the foliage beside his body. So he'd been there a while. Now, obviously this is in the open, in a field. There could have been wildlife activity, insect activity. A horrific sight to come upon, completely unexpected. But the area where the body had been found had been something of a hotspot in the past for killers dumping bodies. Back in 1995, so 4 years previous, a sex worker had been found shot dead in an abandoned home along the same stretch of road. So one of the theories that the investigators had, that there was some connection between the previous deaths that had occurred along that stretch of road and this of who investigators found to be 41-year-old Ricky McCormick. It was identified via his fingerprints, and then search was on to find his cause of death. It was found that he was suffering from chronic heart and lung problems. After some investigation into his life, he was unemployed, he was on disability, but he wasn't homeless. He was living in the greater St. Louis area for the latter part of his life. He got 4 children from previous relationships. So people knew him, but investigators were still left with this glaring problem. Well, 2 problems. Firstly, did Ricky succumb to his illnesses? Was he just walking across a field and he had a heart attack or something and it was natural causes? Or was there something more sinister? The second problem was, what's with these notes, these undecipherable notes? One of the issues was Ricky didn't drive, but yet the cornfield he was found was 15 miles away from his home. So had he walked 15 miles? Had he gone for a long walk? Or was he taken there? So this led to much speculation, and a theory developed that Ricky may have been the victim of foul play. And rather than this being natural causes due to heart disease or lung disease, that he was in fact the victim of homicide. This speculation was further supported by the fact Ricky had a head injury. At least that's what the medical examiner thought, but it wasn't 100% sure because his body was in such an advanced state of decomposition. Major Tom O'Connor of the Major Case Squad announced that they were treating this as a suspicious death and were investigating it as if it were a homicide, even though they couldn't be 100% sure because of the undetermined cause of death. While the cause of death was under investigation, investigators began piecing together Ricky's last known movements. He'd been seen alive on the 25th of June at Forest Park Hospital in St. Louis, where he'd received medication from his doctor. The advanced state of decomposition, well, that was due to it being out in the open, wildlife activity. He actually hadn't been dead weeks, as was originally thought. He'd only been dead for 5 days, or less. He was alive on the 25th of June and he was found on the 30th. So it just shows the power of nature in decomposing a body, doing what nature does. It seems horrible to us with our delicate sensibilities, but that's how nature works, I'm afraid. Further looking into Ricky's background, investigators found no evidence of Ricky being involved in things like gang activity. There was nothing that would immediately jump out at anybody to say Ricky could be a victim of homicide. But it was finally announced that a medical examiner, despite every effort, could not determine a cause of death, nor could investigators find any evidence of a crime. Therefore, they concluded that Ricky had died of natural causes. Even though this was peculiar, it is possible that he did walk 50 miles and died of natural causes, and that was that. This case was just forgotten by the public and, truth be told, by investigators until the March of 2011, when the FBI announced that Ricky had in fact been murdered. Previously undisclosed to the public were these 2 notes. Now obviously they were found at the time of his death, but you know, officers just scratched their heads and thought, weird, but it's natural causes, you know, we don't need to find the answer to why these notes were in his pockets. But it was the FBI that insisted that they now wanted the public's assistance on deciphering these notes, because they thought that might lead to clues about the killer or killers of Ricky McCormick. So, this is what the FBI announcement said. On June 30th, 1999, sheriff's officers in St. Louis, Missouri, discovered the body of 41-year-old Ricky McCormick. He had been murdered and dumped in a field. The only clues regarding the homicides were 2 encrypted notes found in the victim's pants pockets. And this is just an example of the text within one of those notes. It just looks meaningless, but it doesn't look indiscriminate. Lots of things in brackets. What's all that about? And then there's like number patterns. There's something there. I mean, I'm rubbish at deciphering codes and things like that, but many people have tried. The FBI tried, and they couldn't crack this code. So the 2 notes contain more than 30 lines of this material, which was a variety of letters, numbers, dashes, and parentheses. According to Ricky's family, he'd actually been writing such notes since he was a little boy. Was he involved in something that required him to write in code? Or had he written these notes known only to himself what they meant, and they're completely unconnected to the murder? This experimentation with codes and ciphers, one investigator stated, we asked the family and they said he did it quite often. Nobody knows what it means. It's kind of like private diary writing. So in releasing photographs of the 2 notes, Dan Olson, the chief of the FBI's Cryptoanalysis and Racketeering Records Unit, said breaking the code could reveal the victim's whereabouts before his death or could lead to the solution of a homicide. In releasing the 2 notes, we hope that somebody with a fresh set of eyes could understand their meaning. They also wanted to find any other notes that Ricky had written in the months up to his death, to see if they could compare them and see if, you know, there was any commonality. And Olson said even if we found out he was writing a grocery list or a love letter, we'd still want to see this because it gives them a clue to solve this particular code. This is a cipher system we know nothing about. So these All the notes. So you've got all these brackets, and then you've got this, you know, putting like bubbles around. Like this is something so very specific. But then in a bizarre twist to what the FBI had said, that Ricky's family said he regularly wrote these notes. A few months later in 2012, members of Ricky's family came forward and said no, they'd never said that. They'd never told investigators that he'd written in code, but instead told them that he sometimes jotted down nonsense that he called writing. He was a high school dropout and he actually couldn't read and write very well. So they strongly refuted the claims that the notes found in Ricky's pockets were actually written by him, which leads to even more questions. Was Ricky using this gibberish as something meaningful to him that his family weren't aware of? His mother, Frankie Sparks, described him as non-politically correct, but as retarded. While his cousin, Charles McCormick, said he often talked like he was in another world, which suggested they may have suffered from something like schizophrenia or some kind of other psychotic disorder. His aunt, Gloria McCormick, recalled Ricky went to see a psychiatrist, and he said Ricky had a brick wall in his mind. He said Ricky refused to break that wall. He didn't like the life of living poor, and he had an active imagination. So did his active imagination and his psychotic episodes result in him writing this code that his family thought were gibberish, that he wouldn't have written this about, you know, a killer or... I don't know, it's really confusing. Indeed, in 1992, he was arrested for SA, and while awaiting trial, his public defender noticed that she had cause to believe that he was suffering from some form of mental disease. And then family disclosed 2 weeks before Ricky's death, he purchased a one-way bus ticket to Orlando, a place that he had no connection with. And it was just one of 2 trips that he'd made down the coast that same year. Investigators were never able to establish who Ricky travelled down to Orlando to meet. Some suggestions he went there for drugs, but maybe he just went there for the hell of it. But the FBI are confident that, despite what the family have said and the disputes about it, that the notes were in fact written by Ricky. He provided an example, pointing out the circles drawn around some segments of code, like this, and the brackets, as being something meaningful to the person that wrote them, rather than being written by someone else. And if they'd have been put into his pockets by the killer, why? But since their release in 2011, literally thousands of people online, as well as the FBI experts, have tried to crack the code, and no one has been able to do it. So Ricky's case does remain open. It is stated by the FBI that they believe this is a homicide. So who killed Ricky McCormick? Or was this a case of a very peculiar death by natural causes? And it's the peculiarities that lead the FBI to believe this must be a homicide, when actually it isn't. This is a rather peculiar life of a man who died, unfortunately, in a field on his own. And we may never know for sure. Let me know your thoughts about it down below, and I'll see you very soon in the next episode of Cold Case Christmas.